When have you ever feared for your life and why? It's Em. Thanks for joining us today, and I hope you enjoy. Story 1 was 17 years old and walking home at 3 a.m. on a country road. I had no ride. Nobody called, and my dad worked the third shift. Was gonna walk the tracks, but running into a pack of coyotes or something else made me leave for the highway. We walked it often during the day and just popped into the corn to avoid 18-wheelers until they passed. Completely undetected unless farm animals heard you and kicked up a fuss. Was almost home when I heard a car from behind, and no time to hide in the corn. I prayed it would simply pass me, but it pulled up, and the lone guy asked if I needed a ride, etc. I could not see into the car. I thought maybe it was someone I knew, but did not recognize the voice. All I could see from the open passenger window was a dash light, and he would not move his face into the one streetlight at the crossroad that I was all lit up with. He acted all concerned that I was walking at that hour, and he could take me home. Was this a husband who drove me home from babysitting in the past? A neighbor, voice dripping with concern, etc. I was so tired from walking uphill for about 4 miles, but a voice in my head said, "Do not get in that car." He slowly drove alongside me. I knew I was blocked by an algae pond on my right and an embankment on the left, which I would have had needed to pass in front of the car to get to. And he'd have time to grab my feet if I managed to get there. Nobody was gonna hear screams, so fighting was not an option. As he asked me how old I am and where I lived, I gave him 2 sensors just up the road. I figured I had about 50 feet until I cleared the bog and could book it through a cornfield, then make my way through rows of houses to mine. As I shuffled along the gravel, he desperately tried to get me in the car. At just the right moment, I ran, like I never ran before. I'm not the athletic type, and running through a cornfield is tougher than one would think. Ankles twist and bend every which way with the large dirt clouds. But I ran my butt off for my life. As soon as he heard the gravel skitter when I took off, his tone of concern completely changed. He began screaming he was gonna get me, calling me names, and floored the car to the entrance of my little community. I ducked in between houses, hiding by sheds, boats, and cars, trying to hide the steam from my breath because he was driving up and down the little streets looking for me, yelling about what he was gonna do when he caught me. Thought about going to a neighbor, but knew he would find me before they could even come to the door, if they even did. I saw him coming up the opposite direction, one street over, and blasted through the back of the houses, kind of doubling back to my house, and he saw me. I heard him step on the gas, squeal around the far corner, while I ran as hard as I could to my home. I got into the house, left the place dark, locked the door, and seconds later watched him go by, yelling and searching. I got away, was terrified he saw which house I went to and return, so I waited a while before going to sleep to be sure he wasn't coming back. Never thought I could run that fast. Never did anything that stupid again. Look, I also grew up in a pretty small town, and everyone thought it was safe to be out super late at night, whenever you wanted, because everyone knew each other and thought nothing bad could happen. But stuff like this would happen every so often, and while most of the time, it's always just kids messing around and chasing their friends down. But sometimes it would be an older person. I'm talking like 30 plus. And that's when you knew to just bolt. Unless it is someone who genuinely looked like they were looking for directions. We were always told to run like hell and try to lose people. This happened to my friends and I like once or twice before we eventually got our own cars and stopped walking so late at night. Story 2. Really stupid. I was like 8 to 9 and I always hated big rides. The ones that make you go really high usually. I was somehow persuaded to go on one of those huge spinning mushroom-shaped free-hanging swing chair fellas. I hadn't seen one of these going before, but I was assured it wouldn't go high and wouldn't go fast. I thought it was just like a merry-go-round, but the seats hung down. The seats, by the way, were just 2 straps attached to a U of metal that went behind you, so they were just hanging midair, with a strap of leather entrenched in your butt crack and digging into your upper thigh, and a loose metal bar looped around the chain so it could freely slide up and down the chain to let you get in. That's it. Reminder, I am skinny, and this thing is meant to be able to see the grown-up if needed. Things start up. I notice it's going quite high, but slow, so I'm not too worried. But I already don't feel safe as it's starting to move around, and so am I. I'm rattling around in this pathetic excuse for a seat. The whole thing is lost, and nothing I hold on to feels secure. And I'm stupid enough to try to grab the bar in front of me, which just lifts and goes away as it starts to speed up and spin around, putting us at a 45-degree angle. I'm wafting about like a ribbon on the end of this chain, because I'm too light to give the thing any sort of weight to remain in a forward-facing position. Nothing in front of me anymore to even hint at stopping me from falling forward. Arms trying to find something to hold on that wasn't moving around. The chain I'm on is twisting and spinning because of wind resistance, and it's rocking forward and backwards, as I seem to have developed a forward and backward momentum. I was freaking terrified. I just remember tensing up, closing my eyes, holding tightly to the strip of metal to stop myself moving around in the seat, and just prepared myself for the whole thing to just flip over, as it seemed inevitable. As it turns out, everyone else had seen all this happening, and they had to stop the ride. I actually don't remember the rest of that day, but people were very nice to me for a little while after that. I'm also not the biggest fan of anything with big drops, but that's just because I have migraines, and those kinds of ride mess with my head too much. Regardless, I always stress to people it's good to try new things, but not enough that you end up actually hurting yourself. Your life is not a risk that you should wave around for the sake of being adventurous and trying something you don't already like. I know the kind of ride OP is talking about, and while I don't think the drop is the problem, I also know that the ride supervisor should have told them no because they were too skinny. If OP got hurt, I would tell them to sue, because this feels like an oversight by the operations person. Story 3. When I went to see the latest Thor movie last summer, I went solo. But the theater was packed with maybe 200-ish people. Towards the end of the movie, we all hear a loud bang that came from the hallway just beyond one of the exit doors. Everyone's head turned to look towards the noise, and a few people started nervously murmuring. And my first thought was, maybe someone just slammed the door loudly. Then, maybe 10 seconds later, we hear bang, 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 bang in rapid succession. Now I'm thinking, holy crap, those are gunshots. And I could tell I wasn't the only one because the whole theater tensed up. I think I might have been the first person to actually get up out of their seat. I remember saying out loud, okay, let's go. And then the whole theater sprung up from their seats and made a rush for the other door on the opposite side of the theater from where we heard the noise. People were stampeding. Even though I was one of the first to react, my seat was in the middle of the theater, and I soon found myself stuck in the middle of the crowd. At some point, I considered jumping over a banister to get out faster. But I guess at that moment, I thought maybe it would make me more of a target if someone came in with a gun and saw me. I don't know. On the way out, a little kid face planted in front of me. I sort of helped him up a bit and remember just yelling, "Come on, kid, we gotta move." Then he ran off with the rest of his family. Once we got out of the theater room, I took off my flip-flops so I could run faster. The whole building running into the street found out later through Twitter that there was no shooter, just an obnoxious little kid who thought it would be funny to repeatedly slam the theater doors like that in the middle of a movie. Felt a little silly after that one, but it's still better to be safe than sorry. It also gave me a good excuse to call my family and tell them I love them. I think I've mentioned this before, but I was a kid in an American school when a lot of the shootings really started to pick up. Parkland happened when I was in high school. I know I'm young, lol, please don't hate me, but this really started to terrify us because every time we heard a loud noise, anything, from a locker slamming to someone blowing something up in the chemistry lab, the school would go on lockdown. Then one day, someone did actually bring a gun to school, and while nothing bad happened, no one got hurt, and it wasn't even brought out of the bag, it's kind of messed me up to this day that whenever I hear loud noise, I still freeze up. Story 4. I once started falling asleep at the wheel in the middle of the night driving through a long tunnel, which was pretty scary when I got off the curb and popped a tire. However, I'm getting more and more afraid for my life in my home of Florida. More fear than that driving incident. I use science and logic to make decisions. I do not believe in the supernatural, including gods. I keep seeing how half of the people around me are hateful bigots, while the other half do nothing. It is looking more and more like a fascist state. I do have the advantage of being a white male with a biblical name that allows me to avoid surface-level prejudice. However, the comfort level of that sees in my presence to openly speak about their views is grinding at my fears. Then I see them being successfully political, so that their unfounded beliefs are making laws and decisions for everyone. Not only am I losing feelings of safety, but I see the harm they are doing to so many others. When I look for people who do not think like them, I am met with the same level of unfounded convictions or sympathizers of what they think are just a few extreme conservatives in their political party. When I find groups that sound like I would find rational thinking, I meet rebels without a clue. I try to hide my routines and hobbies, but that has even become difficult. I'm a science teacher and got an email last week about all reading material needing approval. I found multiple arbitrary requirements of what can be in the classroom. So I asked the librarian about them. She could only agree with my assessment of the criterion. My hobbies are social, so they got hit hard by the pandemic. They have not recovered, and it is getting harder to maintain the regular group. These attempts at hiding from my fear prove unsuccessful. I find solace only in telling myself that I am sacrificing my state to idiots and radicals, so that their states of origin can help the country return to progress, as their votes are consolidated here. Story 5. I used to work late shifts in a hospital in a city area. One time, I left around 4 a.m. because my replacement was ill, and if I could reach someone to replace me, it took those 4 hours. I also had a stupid habit of parking my car in a truck parking lot, reasoning that since the trucks had guards and paying them a small monthly fee would help keep my car safe. Note, the hospital didn't have a parking area for junior doctors, only for higher-ups. So I was forced to park outside anyway. So as I entered the truck park, I noticed that the guard was nowhere to be found. I didn't put a lot of thought into it and just went for my car. When I reached it, I found 4 men raising the car on bricks and starting to dismantle the tires. I was shocked, so I just shouted at them. Stupid move. They immediately charged me with the tools they had in their hands. I don't know how I did it, but I took a car jack aimed at my head from one of them and started to manically wave it at them, and I think it connected to some of them. Either it was me screaming at the top of my lungs with the car jack, or the arrival of the guard that made them run away. Suffice to say, I was jumpy for the next hour. Eventually, the guard brought another guy and we placed the tires back on my car, and after another hour, I was calm enough to drive. The next day, I went to the boss and demanded a parking spot inside the hospital's parking lot. After some hours of negotiations, I got a parking spot. The next week, I shifted to the other shift from night to morning. Geez, the fact OP still had to negotiate for a spot is insane to me. Like, imagine someone saying, "Yeah, I had to park my car outside because you don't offer spots." And not only did someone take the tires off my car, they also tried to seriously harm me when I went to stop them. And if the guard hadn't shown up, I could have died. And they just look at you like, "What do you want me to do about that?" Damn right OP should have had the spot and morning shifts. Story 6. My friend has a diesel truck that has mods that we're unaware of. Needless to say, we have an idea, but not a full clue of its full potential. Him, his wife, his Termish, his toddler, and I were in the truck in the acceleration lane onto a highway. Since it was a truck, power is to the rear wheels, but the weight is all up front. We lost control on a minor turn on the highway between exits and swerved in the 2 lanes into the median, missing a guardrail from an underbridge. Also missing the pillars of said bridge. Went towards the opposite traffic lanes and thankfully couldn't make that up that hill and settled in the middle after swerving back and forth for a bit. Thankfully, no one was near us when we were on the road. But it sucked that no one even stopped on the shoulder anywhere. Another time was when I was driving home from a horse riding session and it was drizzling. But I was in my first pickup truck. So my dumb butt didn't brake enough coming down from a hill. Into an intersection I had to make a left turn at. I swung out immediately, facing perpendicular in my lane, and thankfully there was a turning lane in the opposite direction. So there was a lined off area between us where no one would go. Instinctively, I let off the gas completely, did not brake, and saved myself from going straight. Definitely was a bit shaken, but grateful my gut handled it perfectly. Rain will affect how you drive, so calm yourselves and be safe. Also, keep your tires in check. People, that tread is needed for the order to pass through, and if it's not there or you're going too fast, you're not going to have that needed attraction. Story 7. Had a gun pulled and cocked on me with my partner next to me in our 6 model, directly behind me in the child seat. I didn't even think as I slammed the gas, hitting the bed of his truck as I sped out of the neighborhood. Thankfully, my girlfriend hit the emergency button in our Corolla, and the map popped up on the display module in the car. This neighborhood has lots of dead ends and loops, and you can get lost if you're not familiar. So the map really helped as I was able to quickly notice a route out and hauled butt out of there. My partner was in hysterics because she thought our son had been shot. There was a lot of noise from hitting the truck, and it all happened real fast. I was hyper-focused on getting us out of the situation. It was crazy. I have never been so focused in my life as I gripped my steering wheel for dear life. I was making sure not to hit anyone or anything, as I was doing 70 in a residential neighborhood. It sucks because I think we have PTSD from that situation. I moonlight as a delivery driver, and I think every car I pass is gonna shoot me for some reason. Or if I accidentally pull up to the wrong house on delivery, I'm gonna get shot. Funny enough, everyone's been real nice in the hood where I make deliveries. My girl has intrusive thoughts of getting shot pretty often now too. I'm really sorry, OP. This does sound like something that would cause PTSD, but you were incredibly smart in getting you and your family out of there safely. I know people have probably told you this, but please do try and look into getting some therapy or something for you and your girlfriend. Being afraid of just driving in cars can be a major detriment to your daily life and function. It's always okay to ask for help when you need it. Story 8. I got stuck in the ditch on a country road with nothing inside in the middle of a snowstorm once, coming back from a wedding at 3 in the morning. It was minus 45 and I had no cold weather gear, just a suit and tie, and I had a crappy phone that had like 1 hour battery life under optimal conditions. That was at 2% battery. The only thing that saved me that night was the fact that I had fueled up the car before arriving at the wedding, and that it had stayed running after the crash so I could charge my phone to call for help, text my friend where I was as backup, and use the heat to stay warm. Otherwise, I would have surely frozen trying to walk to get help, as the nearest house was about 5 kilometers away. I measured it when I was back on the road after being rescued, and I'd be walking in dress shoes. It took a tow truck 2 hours to arrive, and not a single car passed by that time, so nobody would have found me until next morning. It was that day that I learned there are usually many layers of safety nets between you and death. And sometimes they all disappear, except for 1 or 2. And you realize that life is exceptionally fragile. Also, keep warm clothes in your car if you live in a winter climate. Story 9. 4 weeks prior to this incident, my father tried to strangle my brother over an argument about a TV remote. My uncle had dragged him off, and no one ever spoke about it again. So when we arrived at my father's house for visitation, he suddenly demanded me to hand in my phone. My mind went straight to if he tried to kill my brother again. My uncle won't be there, and I will need to be able to call the police. I refused. He said I wasn't leaving my room or eating until I handed in my phone. 4 days later, he screamed at me, threatened to kill me, and punched me. I wasn't given food beyond the bare minimum, which I had to eat alone while my father filmed me. My phone had no camera, so I had no proof. I called my mother, begging her to pick me up, but she couldn't be bothered to end her holiday early, despite it only being a 4-hour drive. I thought I was going to die there, and child services wasn't picking up the phone. When the whole ordeal was over, no one ever spoke of either incident again. And when I brought it up, I was called a liar. That week, both my parents became dead to me when I was 14. Honestly, good, OP. You need to put your foot down when it comes to these people. Your uncle sounds like probably the best option out of 3 parental figures you've mentioned, but even he might not be a great fit if he doesn't believe you. I would advise checking out r/Raised by Narcissist, as they're a really good support group for people who grew up with crappy and abusive parents. I hope the best for you and your brother, OP. Story 10. 7.8 earthquake in Nepal, 2015. Followed by a 6.7 the next day and a 7.3 a week later. Was living at my father's at the time, a house which happened to be built somewhat like an Atlantic wall bunker, meaning that my first impressions of the earthquake were pretty much, what, is that it? Fast forward a week later, and on part of an aid convoy delivering 15 tons of food, another emergency aid to a pair of villages in the north, when the 7.3 hit. Now, Nepal is a very hilly country with steep valleys, and geologically new mountains and hills, meaning they're not quite so solid, meaning that when the ground shakes, hills tend to shed weight, a lot of weight, downhill, towards where the roads and villages tend to be. Long story short, a good chunk of a hill came sliding down, some 300 meters from where I was, along the road where we were traveling, and where we would have been some 2 minutes later. Avalanches are scary, but watching a literal chunk of hell go frick this and crash its way down a valley will have you sit in silence pondering the horrors of the world for years to come, and change your sweat and poop-stained clothes. Story 11. My brother P and I were riding our 4-wheelers on some trails behind our house. He got stuck and I was behind him, so it was my job to take a trail I had never been on before to pull him out of the mud from the front. The trail was pretty overgrown, and what I thought was solid ground ended up being the edge of a drop-off. I remember flipping over to the front on the four-wheeler and coming back to awareness with it crushing me. I did my best to crawl out from underneath it, but I was just a 110-pound 14-year-old girl. I yelled louder than I have ever in my life. I didn't think P would be able to hear me from so far away, so I just kind of prepared myself to die. I passed out because the weight on my chest was so heavy, I couldn't breathe. Luckily, my brother did in fact hear me. He told me later that when he found me, he thought I was dead. Adrenaline hit him so that he could lift it off me. In the end, I only scuffed up my hands. It happened on Thanksgiving morning, so I definitely had something to be thankful for. Talk about one hell of a story to tell at the dinner table that night. When you do the "what are you thankful for" question. I'm thankful for family. I'm thankful for this food. I'm thankful that P was able to lift a huge four-wheeler off of me and I didn't die. Story 12. The last time I was in Chicago, I went to go to this DDD featured restaurant. I made the mistake of taking the bus and at night. We went from the Mag Mile to funeral parlors and liquor shops on repeat real quick. Realizing my mistake, I got off the bus hoping to get the next one back. It was a very bad spot to get off. A few guys playing dice got up and started posturing as I tried to walk to the bus stop. I decided to run into a convenience store and they chased me into it. Followed me around a bit when I was in the store. I asked the clerk to use their phone. He refused, so I asked for him to call a cab. He refused again. I waited till the next bus was driving up and ran into it as the doors opened. Of course, the frickin' bus needs exact change, and I just threw a $10 in the till to get me the freak out of there. It might not be scary for anyone else, but as a tourist with no cell service, and knowing Chicago's reputation, I feared for my life. Story 13. A couple months ago, after some really heavy snow, I was driving at night with my partner in the passenger seat, going about 40 miles per hour, and a bough from a tree fell on my car. I slammed on the brakes. Bough split over my roof, half of it coming through the windshield. Dead center. Actually hit me in my forearm. Felt like I'd been punched. That piece of the bow was probably about 6 feet long and maybe 8 to 12 inches in diameter. We were both fine. Insurance declared the car totaled. I didn't even get a bruise. Closest I've ever come to death. Funny thing is, I never really felt scared. Not saying I was brave. Just that it all happened so fast, I didn't even have time to be scared. I slammed on the brakes, and when we stopped on the road, with a hole in the windshield and a bunch of electronics dangling from the roof. Sometimes when near-death experiences happen super fast and there's really nothing wrong, we're able to decide a refusal in EMS for patients because there's truly nothing wrong and medically they're fine. I do always advise people to still go to the hospital and get checked out for either shock or internal wounds like bleeding, just because you never fully know what's going on until you get it checked out. Better safe than sorry, in my own opinion. Story 14. Allergy to medicines. I got all the absolutely worst side effects, including ones with a mortality rate 50%. Let's say public healthcare is not so good in my country. Doctors wouldn't believe me, and when I was waiting in the hospital, I was deemed a low priority because I'd given them an anti-fever pill on my way to the hospital. It was 40.8 degrees Celsius. I didn't want to die, and during the examination, my temperature was 37.5 degrees Celsius. I had to wait 15 hours, during which the rash covered my entire body, and some parts inside, and my skin started peeling off my face. And when the doctor finally took me, he wanted to send me back home. And because of this, he didn't get any information about what was happening to me from the examiners. Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.